In Sparta, when a baby was born, there were no embraces. There was a question: does this body serve? A council of elders examined it. If they found weakness, a twisted leg, a weak cry, any sign of frailty, the baby was taken to the mountains that same night. And it didn't come back. They didn't hide it. They didn't deny it. It was law. But this didn't start at birth, it started before, in the decision of who could have children, in arranged marriages, not for love, but for genetics, in a system that turned the bed into a laboratory. Sparta didn't raise families, it designed warriors, and to achieve that, it had to control something very personal: human reproduction. Today we know a lot about the Spartans, their battles, their discipline, the legendary agoge, where 7-year-old boys were transformed into war machines. But there's a part of the story almost nobody tells, the part that comes before, the brutal decisions that made everything else possible. Because to understand how Sparta created the perfect warrior, first you have to understand something uncomfortable. They treated human beings as raw material, and it worked for centuries, until it didn't anymore. This examination goes deeper than most accounts of Sparta. If you want to see history told this way, systems exposed, not just glorified, hit the like button and subscribe now. Let's begin at the beginning. Let's start at the beginning. The baby is 48 hours old. Its mother hasn't named it yet. Because in Sparta, names waited. They waited to see if the baby passed the test. To understand why, you need to know something about Sparta that doesn't appear in the movies. They were few, terribly few. At their peak, there were approximately 8,000 full Spartan citizens. They called them Spartiates. Facing them, 150,000 helots, enslaved, most of them descendants of conquered Messenians, entire peoples who remembered having been free. Do the math. Each adult Spartan had to control 19 people who hated him. Revolts weren't a possibility. They were a certainty. Violent, constant, existential. Sparta didn't have the luxury of weak citizens. Everybody had to count. And that counting started on the day of birth. The baby was brought before the Gerousia, a council of 28 men over 60 years old, plus Sparta's 2 kings. They weren't doctors, they were war veterans, men who had killed, who had watched their companions die, who knew exactly what kind of body survives in battle. The inspection didn't take long. Legs, straight. Solid bone structure, spine. Any curvature? Chest, well-formed rib cage, the cry, strong lungs. One of the elders would lift the baby toward the light. Turn it, press its chest to provoke crying. Observe the response. Sometimes the defect was obvious. A malformed limb, clear signs of illness. But other times it was subtler. A cry that sounded weak, skin that seemed too pale, something indefinable that the elder, with decades of experience, simply noticed. If it passed, the baby returned to its mother. For now, if it failed, it was wrapped in cloth. A soldier carried it that same night toward the slopes of Mount Tegetus. There's a place there. The Greeks called it apothetai. The deposits, rocks, wind, night cold. The soldier left the baby and descended alone. Infant exposure existed throughout the ancient world. In Athens, in Rome, in Carthage. But there was a difference. In those cities, it was a family decision. Private. Usually economic desperation. In Sparta, it was state policy. Mandatory. Systematic. It wasn't tragedy, it was protocol. But this was only the first filter, because for the babies who passed, the control was just beginning. The Spartan state didn't wait until you were born to control you. It controlled you before, when your parents met, when they married, when they conceived. Every step was by design. In Sparta, you didn't choose who you married. State magistrates evaluated young people as if they were breeding livestock, and in a sense they were. Him, tall, broad shoulders, father and grandfather war veterans, no known family history of disease. Her, wide hips, robust constitution, capable of physical training without injury. Healthy lineage, beauty mattered, but not as decoration. It mattered as a signal of health. Complete teeth meant good childhood nutrition. Clear skin meant absence of disease. Facial symmetry meant development without complications. The elders weren't looking for compatibility, they were looking for probability of strong offspring. And once decided, the couple was informed. Not consulted, informed. Love wasn't part of the equation. Love was irrelevant. Some Spartans, it's true, developed affection for their assigned partners. It happens, even in systems designed to prevent it. But that affection was accidental. It wasn't the goal. The goal was production, and the system went further. If a Spartan man was considered genetically superior, a decorated warrior, exceptional constitution, but his wife couldn't conceive, the state allowed, even encouraged, that man to have children with another man's wife. It wasn't adultery, it was civic service. Plutarch, the Greek historian, documents specific cases. An older man with a young fertile wife would allow a young warrior to impregnate her. The resulting child was considered an honour to both families. The husband felt no jealousy, he felt pride. His household had contributed a future soldier to the state. And the woman, well, her opinion doesn't appear in the records. This wasn't sexual freedom, it wasn't free love, it was eugenics. The word didn't exist yet. It wouldn't be coined until centuries later, but the practice was exactly that. Intentional selection of human characteristics considered desirable. And it worked. The Roman idea of pater familias, the father, as absolute authority of the household, didn't exist in Sparta in the same way, because the body didn't belong to the father, not even to the person themselves. It belonged to Sparta. This was explicit, legal, cultural. Men lived in communal barracks from age 7 to 30. Even after marrying at 20, they didn't live with their wives. Marriage was an arrangement for procreation, not for cohabitation. Men would sneak away from the barracks at night, briefly visit their wives, and return before dawn. Some fathers knew their children only through scheduled visits. The nuclear family didn't exist, only the state existed. And so, generation after generation, Sparta produced physically superior children. Children who, at 7 years old, would be torn from the little they knew as family, and delivered to something much worse. The boy is now 7 years old. He's lived with his family these past years. He's known a mother's warmth, play with other children, meals at home. But today, all of that ends. This morning, his mother dressed him in silence. She didn't cry, she couldn't. In Sparta, mothers who cried for their sons were considered weak, and weakness wasn't tolerated. She took him to the central plaza. Other boys his age waited there, maybe 50, maybe 60, all with the same expression, barely contained fear. A man approaches, tall scars crossing his face, an agoge instructor. He doesn't speak to the boy. He grabs his arm and pulls him toward the group. The mother stands there, motionless. She won't see him live in her house again. Not for 23 years, if he survives. Because the agoge wasn't a school. It was a machine designed to break children and rebuild them as something completely different. And it started that same night. The first lesson of the agoge was simple and merciless. Comfort is the enemy. The Spartan boy slept on a bed he had to make himself. Reeds torn by hand from the banks of the Eurotas river. No knife allowed. His only clothing was a single rough tunic, the same garment for burning summers and freezing winters. And above everything else, he was always hungry. The rations were intentionally meagre, a slow starvation planned with mathematical precision. But this deprivation wasn't just cruelty, it was strategy. The boys were ordered to make up the difference on their own, through theft. In Sparta, stealing wasn't a vice, it was a lesson. It honed stealth, patience, and daring. A warrior who couldn't slip unseen into an enemy camp and steal food was worthless. So the boys learned to move like shadows through their own city, scavenging for scraps. But if you were caught, the punishment was merciless. You'd be flogged without pity, not for stealing but for being foolish enough to get caught. The sin wasn't theft, it was incompetence. The message cut deep. Success justifies everything. Failure has no excuse. On the battlefield, being caught meant death, not just for you but for everyone beside you. The agoge made sure that lesson was branded into flesh. This wasn't simply training soldiers, it was manufacturing predators. Cold, sharp, calculating, stripped of ordinary morality. In their world, right and wrong dissolved into one question. Did you succeed or not? They learned to lie, to vanish, to read weakness, and to obey without hesitation. They were brothers, yes, but brothers bound by pain, rivalry and fear. Starvation and theft were only the opening chapters. The next lessons were far darker. The human body adapts quickly to hunger, cold and blows. But the real war of the agoge was waged inside the skull. Sparta didn't just need muscle, it needed minds honed like blades, spirits emptied of self, loyal only to the state. Having conquered the body, the instructors now targeted the soul. Their weapon, silence. Our word laconic, meaning brief in speech, comes from Laconia, the region of Sparta. That's no coincidence. Spartan children were taught that words were tools, not toys. Speaking idly, making a